Welcome everybody here and online, and we have some introductions I'm going to do in a minute, but first I'd like to ask someone who's had the opportunity to look at our minutes from January 24 to offer a motion to approve those. Have a second? Second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Those minutes are approved. Cameron, do you want to do some introductions?
Thank you, Mayor, and welcome everyone to LPC. Carson, how many do we have online? 81? Awesome. It's great to see so many of you in person up here at the Capitol. We're almost to the 1/3 waypoint here of the legislative session, which if this were a football game means that maybe warm-ups have started. So a lot of action still yet to be played. I want to introduce a new colleague who we at the League staff are very excited to have. It's her first day, actually, Rachel Terry, who is now the Deputy Director here at the League. Rachel, I'll give you a second to introduce yourself to the LPC.
Hi, I'm Rachel Terry. Oops, sorry. Today is my first day. Friday was my last day at the Attorney General's office. I had been there for the last 6 years doing civil rights litigation. I got to work on a lot of really interesting cases. I got to work on the McCluskey case. Like everyone, I'm sure, is familiar with that. One involving whether girls should have their own tackle football teams in high schools, rapes and murders at Utah State, to a bank closure. So I've had a wide variety of cases and opportunities to work with numerous state agencies and also municipalities and counties as the issues that we worked on overlapped. And I'm very excited to be here. So thank you.
We're very excited to have Rachel help fill out our team. We created this position over the last few months, and I want to thank the League Board of Directors for their willingness to create this position to help expand our staff bandwidth and be able to recruit someone of the talent of Rachel Terry to join our team. So that's the good news on the staffing front. I do have some bad news on the staffing front, but it's more about the extended family at the League. So for those of you who are new and maybe haven't heard me use that term before, we as the League rely heavily on staff members and elected officials from our member cities, not just to expand bandwidth, but to bring expertise and credibility and really do deep dives on many issues. And we're losing a member of the extended family today, right, Mark? Today's your last official day. So I wanted to take a moment to publicly acknowledge and appreciate Mark Stratford, who through today is the Assistant City Attorney in Ogden City. But he's, in addition to his roles in Ogden City, has really had an incredible, has made an incredible contribution to the League. So Mark, I actually went back and thought about all the issues you and I have worked on through the years. And it's still not exhaustive. But I'm going to reference some of these because it's important for everybody to know what the Mark Stratfords of the world do for your cities. And it's important to recognize that because of Ogden City and other cities who share their extended family with the League, we have these additional talented people who are helping us out. So Mark and I have worked on towing issues, water rights issues, the constitutional amendment about retail water and service areas, marijuana, accessory dwelling units, assessment areas, homelessness. Mark's represented the League on the Towing Advisory Board, may it rest in peace, the Executive Water Task Force, the Land Use Task Force, State Water Strategy Task Force, and many others. I've lost track of the many late-night phone calls after families are in bed where we've been working on issues together. I have always, in fact, there was one story I wanted to tell that maybe you'll remember, Mark. I was negotiating a towing bill, and Mark is one of the preeminent experts on municipal policy around towing. Yes, that's a thing. I'm a municipal expert around towing, okay? So I was in a legislator's office negotiating the bill, and I had my phone next to me, and I was talking this way to the legislator, texting with my hand to Mark, what do you think about this? And I would talk to the legislator and look down at my phone, nope, that won't work because of this reason. What about this? And back and forth, that went for a good half an hour with Mark chirping in my ear in a modern way. So, Mark, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for your thoughtful approach, your deliberative approach. Thank you for sharing your expertise and with all of us and for your friendship. He's not going far. He's leaving the official city world, but you'll be the general counsel of Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. So our worlds will still overlap. And but thank you for your contributions to the League of Cities and Towns. And to that end, thank you, Ogden City, and thank you to all of the cities who share city managers and city attorneys and planners and elected officials with the League throughout the year as we work on really important issues that matter to everybody. So, Mayor Silvestrini, thank you for that.
Thanks, Cameron. So we're going to jump into this. Cameron, you may as well step here because we're going to talk about economic development and retail incentives and where that stands with Representative Schultz and others. You want to do the? Oh, I'm sorry.
Logistics first, and then.
Oh, okay.
So, yep, I can.
All right, I can do this.
Yep,
So Cameron's got up a list of things, and most of us know this. We get email every Friday fax that contains information about what's going on in this session, and also other things that are valuable, like how to use ARPA money and things like that. There's a nightly email, if you subscribe to that tells what's going on in the session, what Cameron and his troops have been doing each day. And then there are also action alerts with that if you're signed up for LPC that you will get. And these are important if we're running into problems with a bill or anything like that and we need some help for individual council members and mayors to reach out to city managers and attorneys to reach out to your legislators with respect to a bill that we find an issue problematic. And we generally use those basically when there's really a problem we need to basically get something going so that we get somebody's attention and get a change on that. So that's basically how we work on, and I encourage all of you to do that. And if you have any questions, I'm available after, and so will be Cameron. So now we're going to talk about retail incentives.
Law enforcement action.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Then quick reminder about bill tracking with the updated software that's on the website. Carson, I'm going to put you on the spot, or Molly, either of you. How many bills are currently in the tracker? Because I don't have it in front of me. 104. So 104 bills currently in the tracker. So that's going to be well over 200 very soon. So at the end of this meeting, you'll vote to ratify the staff positions and recommendations, support, oppose, neutral, or position pending. As a reminder, we need 60% of LPC voting members present to take a position. So if there's a bill that's on there for which you're concerned about the position, we can pull it out for future consideration, but otherwise you give us that direction. If we don't have 60%, then we take no position on a bill and we stand down. But otherwise, support, oppose, neutral, or position pending based on moving information. The one thing I'll add about action alerts is we have not sent any. So if you're thinking, did I miss an action alert during the first 2 weeks? The answer is no, because we've only sent the daily emails. Action alerts pick up as the session proceeds. So in fact, more than 75% of the bills actually get passed in the last 3 weeks of the session. So actually last 2 weeks of the session. So stay tuned, those action alerts will start coming. And the critical piece here is there are a lot of special interest groups up here that are sending mass emails, and legislators and their interns are inundated with emails. So if you just send an email hoping that's going to do it, it won't cut it. You've got to reach out directly. Call their cell numbers, text them, in-person meetings. Take advantage of the fact that you're an elected official or you're representing your city, and you can break through the email logjam that we're seeing this session. Likewise, the social media engagement. If and when there's a bill that's bad for cities, make sure your residents know about it as well so that your residents can help provide that context and push back on that bad legislation. Susan, just wave your hand. Susan Wood, our communications director, is working hand in glove with the Ledge team. So when we put together talking points, she's also working through them for social media purposes so that we can utilize that. Any questions about communication, how you sign up for emails, any logistics before we jump into the substance? Perfect. Okay. In that case, Mayor Silvestrini, if it's all right, before we jump into economic development, let's just give a quick update on law enforcement. So Mayor Silvestrini and I this morning attended several law enforcement meetings to bring you up to speed on. Number one, we met with the Law Enforcement Legislative Committee to discuss the Garrity issue. I referenced this briefly at LPC a couple of weeks ago. This is the proactive bill that our Loveless and Lead Task Force has been bringing forward to address the grandma classification for Garrity interviews. Now, Garrity interviews are part of the internal affairs investigation and that internal affairs process for any public employee, not just public safety. But public safety is in the spotlight because of a State Records Committee decision in April, where the State Records Committee deemed that the Garrity records in West Jordan City and Conwood Heights City should be public under grandma and not protected. So we are seeking legislation to clarify that that the records that come after a Garrity interview are, in fact, protected records. We had our first meeting with the Media Coalition last week. We're anticipating the Media Coalition to come back with a counterproposal, and this is going to be a very heavy lift. In fact, there have already been several newspapers that have run stories about Garrity and criticizing efforts to try to make these records protected. And the bill sponsors represent Brian Wilcox, who's the chair of the House Law Enforcement Committee. The floor sponsor will be Senator Kurt Bramble of Provo. The House Law Enforcement Committee will likely hear this bill next week because it's still in the process of being wordsmithed and finalized. So there is no bill yet, so we don't have a bill number to ask you to go talk to legislators, but we will. So once we have a bill, we'll send this out, and if you see a member on this committee that represents your city, we will be asking you to contact those House members to let them know that this is important. It's a top priority of the League. It's a top priority of the Chiefs of Police Association, top priority of public employees and law enforcement community in general, and we'll have talking points available to you once the bill goes public. So any questions about the Garrity issue in Mayor Silvestrini?
So this is going to be a heavy lift, as Cameron said, because the headwinds on this, we have the press basically virtually lobbying for release of these records and kind of painting the failure to release them as a lack of transparency or public officials trying to hide something. And in fact, Garrity interviews are extremely useful, not only for our police departments, but for our city governments, to actually be able to talk to employees that may know something about how a coworker acted that help us improve policy. You know, if we can't get honest answers from our employees or law enforcement officers or firefighters, we can't change policy to improve it. We can't fix problems. And these employees are basically, told that if they give a statement and cooperate with this type of an investigation, that what they say can't be used in court. That's what Garrity says. And we've also offered them the idea that it's confidential. So, particularly when you're trying to get the bottom of an incident that involved maybe 3 or 4 law enforcement officers or city employees, those employees, they don't want to rat on their coworker if they think it's going to get in the press or get in the public, and so that you will not get the information that you need to inform good policy without that. So this is actually an important issue for all of us in municipal government to be able to give our employees, no matter what work they do, some assurance that if they're honest with us so that we can make better decisions, that they'll be protected. And the release of these records in the press actually undermines that completely. And so what will happen is people will not be willing to talk to their managers, and we won't be able to use that. And the press's effort on this presumes that we all have a bad motive, that we all want to hide stuff. And frankly, we all know that's not the case. What we want to do is do the very best job that we can. And in order to do that, we have to have the information about occasionally when things do go wrong. Question.
Not a question, Mayor, just a statement. I know the Utah Public Employees Association is very interested in this bill as well for the same reasons that you pointed out. So we'll be working closely with the League on that as well.
Yeah, so at the end of the meeting, we'll be asking for ratification of a position of support on this. All of our police chiefs that Cameron and I met with today, police chiefs from around the state, and sheriffs and all that, they're going to be supportive of this bill. And I think it is going to be important for us to educate our legislators on this, because we have the press against us, and a lot of people think that if you're not releasing this record, you're hiding something. That's not the case. And the other thing that I'll point point out is that there are almost always lots of other types of information that is out there that's made public. And in the cases that are actually, in dispute right now, the public has already received the body cam footage and lots of other information. They just don't get the Garrity interview. So anyway, this is something to keep an eye on.
One other thing of note from Representative Wilcox is that this Thursday, he and state leaders will be hosting a fallen first responders event on Thursday afternoon with families from those fallen first responders of the past year. Councilmember? Oh.
Real quickly on that.
Hold on, you got to wait for the mic, Tim.
Is the Utah Educators Association on board with that as well, with the Garrity?
We have reached out to both the Utah Public Employees Association that Corey referenced, and they've indicated they're supportive. We've also reached out to the UEA. They have not taken a position yet. Okay, any other questions? Okay, the Fallen First Responders event, we will be attending that on behalf of cities. Susan and I will likely be there on Thursday afternoon. So just wanted to make you aware of that, as that's something that would be really powerful to share on social media. And it'll be families of first responders who have fallen in 2021. The last piece that dovetails into this, there's a lot of dialogue up here around everything from mental health to compensation of first responders. We had a very enlightening meeting this morning with Senator Don Ipsen, who was the bill sponsor currently of SB 55, which causes some potential concerns based on the financial impact on communities around recruitment and retention. Councilmember Kate Bradshaw from Bountiful, Mayor Silvestrini, Rachel Terry, and I met with Senator Ipsen, the Chiefs of Police Association, the sheriffs, DPS, UHP, and others this morning. Do you want to just take a quick second to give an update there?
So one of the features of the bill as originally presented was that fines from tickets written by UHP would not go to municipalities. Currently, part of that funding goes that way and helps pay for justice courts. I think that we were successful, I hope, in convincing Senator Ipsen that that's not a strategy that's going to work, and kind of going back to the drawing board to look at something that would work with respect to recruitment and retention of officers. We had a robust discussion about the salary increases that have been granted across, at least in Salt Lake County particularly, but I think statewide, we talked about how can we do things that are palatable to everybody that will, increase recruitment and retention. And I think we had some ideas about that. And where we're headed on this at this point, I think, is actually a joint resolution rather than legislation. Is that accurate? Kate?
For those online, Kate Bradshaw from Bountiful. I think where we're headed is both a resolution, possibly a bill on some type of a housing component, down payment assistance or other type of housing for first responders. And then he did seem, in conversations with him afterwards, to be interested in some of the ideas we talked about with coordinated Explorer, Cadet, Citizen Academy programs, and also on changing that age limit, 19 and 20-year-olds that may be able to be hired in the jails and or being all able to be in post doing their training so that they're ready to be hired at age 21, or potentially even changing that age to be lower.
Back in September at the League conference, the League staff met with the City Managers Association to talk about the overall issue of recruitment and retention of public employees, but particularly in the public safety space. So a lot of the dialogue that we've been having behind the scenes for the last few weeks really came to the surface this morning with Senator Ipsen. We also shared with him a copy of the resolution that the League members unanimously endorsed at the League convention that touched on everything from Garrity to recruitment and retention, to give him some general ideas. So I think if I had to look into my crystal ball, I think what Senator Ipsen wants to do is to have the state take a leadership role in dialogue around recruitment and retention, and then work in partnership with all agencies, including local government, on some long-term strategies, which dovetails nicely into the dialogue that we've already been having between the League and the City Managers Association. So again, no bills necessarily in this space yet, but bills are coming. I should have noted too that Salt Lake City Police Chief, Chief Brown, was in that meeting as well. So Councilmember, I saw your hand go up and that triggered the thought, but go ahead and grab the mic.
Thank you, Councilmember Amy Fowler, Salt Lake City. A question regarding the resolution on retention and recruitment, as it was mentioned about first responders. Does this include, and if it doesn't, can it include our 911 dispatch? Because they're not designated first responders, but I think all of us know how important they are as the first responders. So I'd be interested in those discussions to make sure we're including them.
That's a great point. I think right now Senator Ipsen is starting from the league resolution and the feedback he got this morning. So we can add that piece to the larger conversation. Any other questions on public safety? Okay, well, stay tuned. We wanted to hit some of those highlights because bills will be coming and we'll need your engagement on them even though they're not ready for prime time today. Okay, then I'll just jump into quick update on bills. One thing I neglected to bring up in the welcome piece, for those of you who have historically attended the National League of Cities Conference in Washington, D.C., it is happening. So there was some doubt a few weeks ago, but it is happening in the middle of March. So I wanted to make sure to announce that. We've been promoting it through our channels, but those of you who are interested, we normally host a state night dinner and a brunch. And 2 years ago, we had over 80 Utah city officials who attended. So if you're interested, National League of Cities, we're hosting that conference and we'll be hosting events there. Okay, let's talk about House Bill 151. We talked about this one briefly last week. It's Representative Schultz's retail incentives bill that came through the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. Mayor Ramsey represents the league on the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. She asked to be excused in person because she's actually in Washington, D.C. right now on local government business. The intent of the bill is listed there on the side. Then the league board direction, as recently as early January, was to say, yes, we support new limits on the ability to do incentives for big boxes and dealerships and the like. And the league board directed us to outline a counter proposal, which we briefly referenced last week in this meeting. And those are the quick highlights of that counter proposal. So there's no direct incentives for regional retail, which we had defined as 30,000 square feet. Currently, state law defines those as 80,000. And then still having some exceptions in there for development impediments related to RDAs and CRAs, housing if you had a mixed-use development that included these types of retail facilities, system infrastructure, low-income areas, and not having a new cause of action, which is currently in House Bill 151. We presented that counter proposal last week. Unfortunately, most of it was rejected. So that was as of Friday night is when we presented that counter proposal. So here's where we're at right now. On the left is language that's currently in the public version of House Bill 151. It will get substituted. There'll be a few more things added into it. But right now, that's what's currently in House Bill 151. Every one of those bullet points we negotiated into the bill through the UEOC. And that's everything from certain types of low-income areas to the public safety mitigation or other reasons why cities will provide incentives or other types of payments or grants to businesses in your community. Nevertheless, the fundamental nature of 151 still remains problematic. Number one, because it bans the use of all public funds to incentivize any retail unless it meets the exception. So even though we have tried to highlight different grant programs that cities will provide, such as placemaking facades or for water conservation, and some of those are listed in the exceptions, there still will be other times where cities use public funds, and that would be prohibited unless the legislature has specifically authorized it. One particular example that's not yet in that exception list would be if you did grant programs for historic preservation. The second specific concern is still this housing definition piece. So part of the legislative intent here is to link the use of state and economic development incentives to housing. So the state's looking at doing that with their state incentives, and they're looking at doing that with our local government incentives. And our board has said they're supportive of that concept, so long as we get the actual technical nature of it right. So we are expecting an amendment based on Friday night's meeting to make some changes to the density requirement that's currently in the public version of the bill. But as I've met with commercial developers and home builders and others, there's still concern about whether or not the threshold that is in House Bill 51 is reachable by the private sector, and then how that jives with local planning, specifically for the moderate income housing piece that's still in House Bill 151. We had tried in our counterproposal to offer credit for cities that have planned for housing, but either the housing precedes the commercial development, so the housing's already been built, but it's, say, adjacent to, across the street from, or within a very short distance from the retail centers, but again, that was rejected on Friday night. Then the third piece of it is concerns about the impact on RDAs and CRAs, CDAs, and the like. Even though this bill is not retroactive, it doesn't take effect until July. Right now, under state law, if a city were to enter into a CRA, a community reinvestment area, you have to meet certain development impediment criteria, and this bill narrows down which criteria you can use of those development impediments if you were to do a project that was focused on retail. Then the last piece is this new cause of action. So this would actually call out a new cause of action in state code to allow attorneys to bring actions against a city for violating this new incentive language. So, in a nutshell, those are still the sticky subjects within House Bill 151. I'll be meeting again with House leadership later this afternoon, and we'll keep working to amend 151. In the meantime, we're anticipating House Bill 151 will be in House committee this week. Let's be clear about what that means. The bill is sponsored by the House Majority Leader. And again, we've negotiated quite a few exceptions into the current framework of his bill. So I anticipate that in the House of Representatives, we will face an uphill climb to make additional changes or potentially stop the bill. That said, we will be, once we know exactly what's going to be in House Bill 151, we will issue an action alert, and we will ask you, if you have legislators that are on this list, we'll ask you to have these conversations with legislators about the impact of 151. Now, it's important that when you have these conversations with your legislators, that we stay focused on those key concepts that make 151 unworkable. Because part of the narrative that continues to come up has been the zoning for dollars piece, and the fact that historically, and to a degree today, cities are competing for retail dollars, and so you'll give incentives to get big retailer to pick Cameron City over Silvestrini City. And again, the league board has said we're okay with curtailing that sort of behavior so long as we still have flexibility around redevelopment areas and a workable housing definition and no cause of action, et cetera. So that was the needle that we tried to thread with our counterproposal, and we'll continue working on that counterproposal because we've been working on it jointly with the RDA Association and others. I'm going to stop there because I was told to try to keep this as simple as possible, and I'm not sure I succeeded. But nevertheless, questions. Let's go with Mayor Alder, and then are there any other questions?
When you send out those alerts for people to have a dialogue with their legislator, are you going to send a dialogue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll take this information and share it, because I think it is important for all of us to acknowledge how far the bill has come from when we started the dialogue to today. And Representative Schultz, to his credit, has sat down multiple times with Mayor Ramsey and me and others as we've been making the case for why his bill is too broad, and many of the exceptions you see on the left are a result of that dialogue. So he deserves considerable credit for that, because a lot of legislators want to do that. That being said, we still have the concerns about some of the underlying fundamentals of the bill that we think we can get to yes if we can slide the bill back to something that the board has given us authorization to do. And we've shared that message with him and with senators and with others. And so I anticipate there'll be a lot of movement over these next few days. But if you have a legislator that's on this list, even if your city never does retail incentives, I think it's important to still have that conversation about the impacts on RDAs and on other tools, while not necessarily saying we hate the concept, because the board has already told us we can live with the concept under these certain conditions. Okay, looks like Mayor Zoltansky and then Carson.
Under the list of exceptions, if you can go back to that slide, please, it says small business 30 FTEs. Is that 30 and under FTEs? So that
Yeah,
it's truly
so
small
right now in
business.
151, it creates a new definition of small businesses. And this was actually the result of the dialogue we were having with Representative Schultz, is we had multiple cities who gave examples of small business grants that they provide, whether it's relocation of El Burrito in Clearfield or other ones. Said, what's the state interest in not allowing us to do these types of relocation grants or building facade grants? So our original point was to just illustrate that the state shouldn't have an interest in cracking down on that type of conduct. So the counter proposal back from them was to say, okay, if it's a small business, then you can do it, but then once you grow up a certain size, you can no longer do it. And I think this really does illustrate the tug of war on the foundations of this bill. Because House Bill 151 is drafted is no public funds for anything that's retail related unless you meet an exception that we're going to call out in law. As opposed to saying the problem we're trying to solve is Sandy City and Evelyn City competing for X. And so we're going to curtail that, but we still want you to be able to do RDAs, and we still want you to be able to meet these other objectives. So let's make sure there's still that flexibility while prohibiting what we want to stop, which is the foundation of our counter proposal. So and the small business piece, I think, is a nice illustration of the tug of war. So Carson, you had your hand up from someone online. Is it Paul Larson?
No.
Oh, that was a good guess.
Is that working? Okay, I've got one comment and then 3 questions. So
Okay.
First comment from Roger Baker, the new retail incentive cause of action is guaranteed to spur a new wave of litigation against cities from commercial litigants aimed at both money damages and delaying competitors. And then I'll merge 2 questions here. First, is placemaking still an exception? And I believe our proposal. And then how should placemaking be defined? Do you want me to just list them all out, or do you want to?
Yeah, hit me with all of them, and
All
I'll
right.
hit them
So
all.
placemaking. Has there been discussions on exempting counties of the 4th class? And then lastly, is the mixed use exception applied to a project area or to an individual building?
Okay, in hindsight, I should have written all those down, but let me see if I can, I'll hit them off. So it's placemaking, counties of the 4th class, and the last one was
Mixed use project
mixed-use
or
project
mixed use
area in the
building?
definition. Okay, all right, 3 things. So on the placemaking piece, under the current language of House Bill 151, there is no definition of placemaking. Under our counter proposal, we were saying that yes, placemaking ought to be one of the reasons why a local government should be able to do retail incentives. We offered multiple definitions of placemaking over the last few weeks, all of which have been rejected, but we still had it in our counter proposal as a term. The second one was on counties of the 4th class. The current language in the public version of House Bill 151 exempts cities, towns, and counties of the 5th class or smaller. So that's population of 10,000 and smaller, okay? What our counter proposal was trying to say is let's set a threshold where local governments can still incentivize retail. And if you set that threshold, say at the 30,000 number or thereabouts, by definition, you're going to actually exempt a large chunk of rural Utah because you're not going to see facilities being incentivized that are near that size. So rather than trying to figure out where the exception should be and what's rural versus what's urban, because did you say that one came from Roger Baker? Because I was in an email exchange with a bunch of folks from Tooele and Grantsville who wanted to be treated as rural Utah rather than being part of the shoulder area and urban areas. We looked also at the SB 34 criteria to see if that made sense, but ultimately felt like you could get a better outcome if you just had that threshold. which again, that was why it was part of our counter proposal, which as of now has been rejected, but we'll still be pursuing it. And then the third question was on the definition of mixed use and housing. And this is super sticky. The current public version of the bill is going to change. But the current public version of the bill basically says that 50% of the development area has to include housing in order for a city to do retail incentives. Our counter proposal said, let's tie it to the housing, amount of housing necessary. Let's tie it to the size of the incentive that a city may be giving to a regional retail facility. So I'll do the simple math on the fly here. If Silvestrini City was offering an incentive to a retail facility of 100,000 square feet, and you had a ratio of one housing unit for every 2,000 square feet of resident, or every 2,000 square feet of the retail recipient, then that would be, now here's the math piece, 50, right? Somebody's nodding, okay, good. 50, thank you, Councilmember. Be 50 units that you would need to have as part of that area. So instead of tying it back to the development area, which for some development areas is a huge footprint, like the University Place in Orem's 102 acres, so 51 acres of housing would be almost impossible to do. You tie it back to the size of the incentive. So that was the model that we proposed. Again, I expect there's going to be some changes on the housing piece, but our goal all along has been to actually make that tie workable so that you actually can have the housing link with the incentive, but not such a high hurdle that it never happens. Likewise, we also were making the case that regional housing nearby that potential area where you're doing the incentive should count as a credit. But again, that didn't go anywhere when we presented that on Friday night.
You talk about affordability as well.
Yeah, so Mayor Silvestrini asked about the affordability piece. Currently, the bill has a requirement that 50% have to meet your moderate income housing plan, which even if most developers would say that would be very difficult to achieve. So again, trying to find the right balance of what should be in that incentive. I saw a hand in the back. Randy.
One suggestion I would add to maybe the exceptions might be opportunity zones. That's a state program. So I'd maybe add that to opportunity zones.
Yep, that's a good point. So, as a reminder, here's where we're at. I know I threw a lot at you because there are a lot of moving parts, but we're trying to be as transparent about all the moving parts as possible. There will be a substitute. The substitute will have a few modifications. Nevertheless, once we know where the bill is going and when it'll be in committee, we'll send action alerts. And if you have a member on the screen, follow up with them to talk about the version of 151 and why it goes too far. But we'll also give you tools to be able to say, here's why the Lee County proposal makes more sense. Because if we just go in saying no to this bill, recognizing it has the support of the governor's office and the governor himself, has the support of House leadership, and has a lot of support among rank and file legislators, if we just say no, the door to dialogue is going to close. Whereas over the last few months, and this is a lot of kudos to Representative Schultz, we've had a lot of dialogue about the concept, what we're trying to accomplish, and the bill, and I want to make sure we keep that line of communication open as we proceed. So, Mayor, I don't think we need a standalone motion for this because we have the board motion from earlier in January, and we're still consistent with that, but wanted to bring everybody up to speed. Okay, speaking of bills that are still en route, housing and land use. I feel like this is now my fourth straight meeting of saying, stay tuned, the Commission on Housing Affordability bill is coming. The League Board gave us direction on what we anticipate in that bill. Stay tuned, it's coming. We met with Representative Waldrop Friday and today, and I think they're getting close. And then the board direction had some things we support, some things we oppose, and some things that are those beautiful 3 letters during this time of year of TBD. So once we get the language, then we will start vetting it tightly. We'll have a land use task force consensus bill that Representative Waldrop will be running. But we still are hearing lots of rumblings about other land use bills out there that could be in the preemption space. I scared you with a couple of them last year. Those bills are, by last year I mean last week, Might as well have been last year. Those are still out there, and I want to publicly applaud the league officers, Mayor Silvestrini, Mayor Kafusi, Mayor Ramsey, Mayor Caldwell, and City Manager Gary Hill. Last Monday, when we presented to you about some of the housing bills that were out there, ranging from a state MIDA-like board that could have land use authority to the state spot zoning in communities around the state, the league officers and the UAC officers met Tuesday morning with the governor's senior staff. We have a weekly call that we've arranged with them. We call it the local government kitchen cabinet call. And Mayor Silvestrini, Mayor Ramsey, Gary, Mayor Kafusi, Mayor Caldwell were incredibly aggressive at pushing back on the governor's office about some of these concepts going too far and disrespecting the role of local government. Is there anything you want to add on that piece?
Well, I'll add that the one thing that was encouraging about it is that I think that we got listened to by the governor's office. And then the other thing I'll say, we met with Representative Waldrop on some other concepts this morning, but also on housing. And I'll just have to say that I really am heartened by the fact that I think he wants to be a partner with municipalities and is willing to listen to us and avoid unintended consequences, which is what we've been trying to talk to him about. So I'm at least encouraged that from the MIDA board stuff and all the things that we were hearing that we're making some progress there, not only with Representative Waldrop, but also with the governor's office. So we basically threatened the governor with having to sit in to 11 o'clock meetings with constituents to go through the zoning stuff. If they want to preempt us, then they get to deal with the headaches too.
So as a reminder, this data point we shared with the governor's office. It was in our legislative guide that we shared at Local Officials Day to demonstrate the incredible and historic growth in housing permits that cities are issuing over the last few years. The last thing I'll add with the Representative Waldrop piece is that, in fact, did I skip it? There was a transportation bill or a transportation slide I had in here that maybe just didn't make it into the final cut. But we will be having a specific call tomorrow at noon for cities that have light rail, front runner, BRT, either now or planned for. We will be having a call with those cities specifically tomorrow at noon. And this comes out of the dialogue with Representative Waldrop around station area plans and with Senator Harper around housing and transit reinvestment zones. So tomorrow's call primarily is going to focus on that station area plan piece, which I referenced at LPC last week and told you there'd be a lot of moving pieces. So we'll be sending out a blast email after this meeting. It'll be at noon tomorrow, right? Andrew, it'll come from WFRC. It'll be a joint call between the League, Wasatch Front Regional Council, and the Mountain Land Association of Governments. So if you are a city that has front runner, tracks, BRT now or planned for, please have someone from your city on that call tomorrow at noon as we talk in more detail about this potential legislation around station area plans. Even though I don't have a slide, I'll give you the 30-second version of where the dialogue is going. And Andrew, Miranda, Mayor Silvestrini and I met with Representative Waldrop this morning to talk about it and continue to flesh out the details. What we have seen in California and other states around the country is the legislature coming in and essentially preempting zoning around transit or transportation corridors. What Representative Waldrop wants to do is not that. What Representative Waldrop wants to do is better define the objectives around a station area plan, because right now that's a tool that already exists in state law, but better define the objectives around station area plans, have that state criteria and code, but then defer to the local governments to figure out how to meet those objectives. And then as the city develops and implements the station area plan, then have it get integrated along the regional network through the MPOs, and then have it be part of the SB 34 mechanism. So if you're already under SB 34, if you're West Jordan City, you have to plan for around transit in order to be consistent with SB 34. This would add to that requirement, but still defer to the locals about how you get there. So there are a lot of details that we are fleshing out. and we didn't want to spend a lot of time in the meeting today, but we've, in recent days, have had great feedback from Provo, Ogden, Springville, Taylorsville, Bountiful, Murray, Clearfield. There's been a lot of cities that have been reaching out to us since we announced this last Monday. So tomorrow at noon, watch for the blast email if you're a city with BRT, tracks, front runner now, or planned for. Any quick questions about the station area plan concept right now, and anything any of the MPO partners want to bring up?
I'll just say, one thing that was encouraging is that I think where we made some progress in discussing this with Representative Waldrop is I think we got him away from the idea that workforce services should be the bad cop on all this and be the decider with respect to whether a municipality is meeting its affordable housing objectives or stationary plan objectives. And at least we're trying to be creative about a way to do that so that there's more local government input on that and so that it's not forced on us. There may still be some accountability on that, so that there's a way to, correct a situation that is always, the bad anecdote about the bad city or something like that. But the idea is that there would be an opportunity to make a case for why you're doing things the way you're doing them, and then have kind of some imprimatur from other local governments say, yeah, this is meeting the plan, and workforce services wouldn't be the arbiter of that.
Yeah, again, thank you to those who've reached out over the last few days, those with whom I met on Thursday, because a lot of the feedback, we've already shared that with Representative Waldrop. So Isaac in particular, we had that good conversation about BRT and Provo. That was one of the examples I led with this morning. So thank you for that sort of information. The last thing I'll say before I step down, mercifully for everybody here, to let others come up and speak, is Dave Quayle from West Orange. Thank you for your work on the Garrity piece. Dave has been the point person for West Orange City before the State Records Committee and is doing a lot of the work behind the scenes along with Mark Cottrell, who's in the Salt Lake City Attorney's Office. So this is another example of the extended family working on behalf of all cities. So I didn't see you before when I was talking about Garrity, but wanted to make sure to thank you for your work. And Mayor, thank you for sharing your staff with everyone. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
That's everything that I had on housing, land use, and retail and economic development.
All right, thanks, Cameron. So Justin, you want to come up and we're switch gears and talk about water and landscaping, I guess, right?
All right, hello everyone. We've been tracking a lot of bills. One other thing we've been tracking at my house is where Encanto sits on the Billboard charts. And if your household is like my household, we've been contributing to this. Encanto is currently at its third week at #1 on the Billboard charts as an album. And We Don't Talk About Bruno is sitting at #2. So just know you're all very concerned about that, but my kids are and just texted me, so I want to give you that update because that is the #1 thing going on at my house. All right, so let's talk about a couple of bills here. First, we've talked about this one several times, SB 110. This is the land and water bill that we've worked through, but an update on this one. Mark Stratford and I went to the Legislative Water Development Commission. Did I get that one right? There are a lot of water commissions out there. I'm sure most of you knew that. It's new to my world. But we went and presented this last week, and we had a lot of concern, particularly from our rural legislators, about asking too much sometimes of our smaller cities and towns. And one of the asks that we got is about exempting out a town. A town is anyone 999 residents or less, and potentially fifth-class cities, which is 1,000 up to 9,999 residents. Senator Sandel, whose committee we've got to get this through, is very interested in making an exemption there. What we're looking at is perhaps putting an exemption, but encouraging all cities and towns, regardless of size, to go through this exercise of updating their general plan, but perhaps not requiring that of towns and fifth-class cities. So want to throw that out there and take any comments or thoughts on that one. But this is probably something that we're going to have to do to get through Senator Sandel's committee. I don't think there's any scenario where he lets it through without it. But also it's probably, in the grand scheme of things, not going to ruin water planning too much to do this either, or land use planning. So any thoughts or concerns? If not, we'll continue to support this one as we have, and continue to work through amendments on that one. All right. All right, let's talk about HB 95. So this is Ray Ward's landscape requirement prohibitions. So last week you heard Gary and I talk about this when Gary Hill from Bountiful talk about work that we've been doing with Representative Ward. And there was substitute language that was proposed, and Representative Ward did not like where we were going with that. So this is the current substitute language that he has in his bill. So a municipality may not enact an ordinance, resolution, or policy that requires or has the effect of requiring a property owner to plant or maintain only lawn or turf on any portion or percentage of the landscape portion of the property owner's property. So last week, our alternative, our substitute language would have basically said sub 3 there. Municipalities shall provide a property owner with landscaping alternatives to be used in place of lawn or turf. And Representative Ward made it very clear that that is not what he's going for. He wants to have this sub 2 that says we cannot require only those things, can't just have those alternatives. So with that out there, last week there was a kind of a nuanced motion on this one. We were opposed unless he substituted it. And he did substitute it, and it wasn't the substitute we wanted. So I think we're still probably opposed on this one, but would be willing to take any discussion or thoughts on this. Gary, I don't know if you have anything to add to that one, but Representative Ward is very clear that this is the direction he wants to go. Mayor, and then Isaac.
And Justin, I'm just going to add, I don't know if that's the exact bill language, but I have a lot of concerns about that being really vague, especially if you're going to say that municipalities can't enact ordinances that require maintenance of whatever is on the parking strip or wherever. I mean, those kinds of issues, I think, intersect with code enforcement. This needs to be wordsmithed.
Mm-hmm.
He did take out the prohibition from code enforcement, and so maybe we can work on the language to make that a little more clear. That wasn't his intention, to keep us from being able to enforce ordinances. We did a survey among cities over the weekend after, or before the weekend after we heard Representative Ward didn't like our substitute language. Had responses from, I think, 33 cities. And of the 33 cities, I think there were 4 that require some portion of the landscaping to be sod. None of the other cities actually require sod. So it's hard, it's a little bit hard to go back to him and say that the bill hurts us because the vast majority of cities, at least that we surveyed, don't require turf anyway. So that's a bit of a challenge with that. And I think those that do require it only in very limited circumstances on commercial properties or multifamily. I don't think any of the 33 require landscaped sod on single-family residential. Although the vast majority, if not all, require some sort of irrigated landscaping or landscaping on non-impervious surfaces such as driveways or sidewalks, for what it's worth.
First off, just pointing out that at least as this one's written, I think last week we were talking about, well, you could prohibit 99. This you can't prohibit it. You can't require 1% sod on a landscape portion. So this is a total ban on our ability to require grass. And the other thing I was just going to say, I think it was even at a league event when Governor Cox was talking, and he was like, in surveying this, we're in this drought and everything. I mean, no brainer. We can't let cities require grass. And I just remember that and just think that's part of what we probably need to keep in mind is, at least in his mind, this one's, and we can't be requiring grass in a time of drought was kind of a point that's like, well, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Governor Cox even gave Ray Ward a shout out in his State of the State address, talking about this bill specifically. So there's no question there's backing there. Carson, would you have some online and then come over to Ryan here?
Yep. Do you just want a scattergun approach too, or do you want them one at a time?
I want them one at a time. I learned from Cam's.
All right. First from Paul Larson, does the draft still allow landscaping requirements instead of just turf?
Yeah, so it does say landscaping alternatives. So not just turf, it doesn't say grass, but landscaping alternatives would be there. So you can require landscaping of some sort.
Gotcha. Next from Melinda Greenwood, in theory, with this language, a city could require lawn and trees or lawn and shrubs. and just not say what percentage those have to be of each?
So there's no percentage layout there, so they could say just trees, I guess, arguably, or just shrubs. But you could not say it has to be a certain percentage of shrubs and some percentage of grass or turf. You can't require turf. You have to present alternatives.
Thanks. And then for Aaron Wells, to try and ensure this doesn't end up impacting park requirements in multifamily or planned developments, do you think we could change the language from property owner to homeowner just to try to limit it to single-family homes, essentially?
So that's good. One of the things we don't have up on this slide, but if you look at the bill, is it doesn't apply to golf courses or parks. And there's one other thing, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. The question about a multifamily unit and requiring some kind of play area, something like that, has been brought up, and we can bring that up to Representative Ward, because that is a concern that's been brought up. But parks and golf courses and some of those larger things are already exempted from the definitions.
Thank you. And then one last one from Councilmember Malkovich. Does this include areas with wildland interface ordinances? Conservative irrigation of property is a necessary fire mitigation measure.
There's nothing specific about that in the code or in the proposed bill. And then Liam, we have one over here.
So, Justin, how does this differ from Spenlow's House Bill 121 that's in committee this afternoon?
Yeah, great question. So Spenlow's bill just deals with state facilities at this point. Spenlow's bill originally would have been very duplicative with what Ward is saying here, and would have gone into HOAs and counties and cities. But Spenlow is substituting his bill, so it only deals with
There's
state
a substitute
facilities.
out for that.
Yep, there's a
Okay.
sub out there.
All right, great.
Yeah, great question.
Thanks.
And you can thank Sandy for that one. Sandy cornered Spenlow at Local Officials Day, and then we saw a substitute. It was great.
We saw a substitute.
We also got a substitute for Ray Ward's bill. It just wasn't one we liked. No comment on Bountiful there. All right, any other thoughts or questions on this one? I think this is still an oppose at this point. We'll continue to work with him, obviously, but we may just be at a place where what he wants and where we want to go aren't gonna get to the same place. So we can have this in the other motions later. I don't think we need a motion right now, but it looks like Isaac has another comment.
Just one more piece of this. Our Public Works Director shared something that I thought is useful just to put out there, and that is, he's seen where, California has really gone with, let's solve the water problem, drought problem, or shortage problem on the backs of resident conservation. And he says it will never work. I mean, California now has mandatory, per person, quotas or whatever, 55 gallons per person and things like that going. And he says, when you look at the percentage of water that is used by residences, and it's a small portion. I don't have the fact, unfortunately, in front of me. But his point is, the problem has to be solved through infrastructure and a lot of other things. We're pushing for aquifer storage, aquifer recharge here in Provo to let us just take some water we have rights to and just put it on the ground and let it dissipate into the aquifer. We've measured it works, pilot programs are done. We want to do that on a larger scale. And so I just throw that out to the discussion, and it might be something at some point that it's worth mentioning to your legislators too, that a lot of focus on let's get the residents to conserve, and that's probably a good thing on a lot of levels, but it's not ever going to be the answer, because it's even if all the residents turned off all taps for a year, it doesn't solve the problem. There's too much use by agriculture and commercial and others. So just throwing that out too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the comment I would make to that is, I didn't have time to put the slide together, but there are dozens of water bills going through the session this year, and they are dealing with aquifer recharge. That's actually specifically in one of the bills. Dealing with canals, dealing with infrastructure, dealing with all kinds of different things. So certainly we should not feel picked on, like we are the only entity or group of entities that's being asked to conserve. They're looking all over the place. So I don't think there's any kind of hey, let's just get the residents to do this and nothing else. There are, like I said, at least 12 bills that I counted up really quickly, and I know there's more than that pending. So they're looking all over. All right, let's move on to something everyone will be very excited about, secondary water metering amendments, HB 242. Now, there is a lot in this bill, so don't think I put everything on the slides here, but here's the highlights, here's the big parts, and would love to get our input and figure out what our position should be on this one. So the big takeaway, no later than January 1st, 2030, secondary water suppliers shall install metering. Short version. So by January 1st, 2030, there shall be metering on secondary meters. No. If a secondary water supplier fails to comply with that, beginning January 1st, 2030, they may not receive state money for any purpose until the secondary water supplier completes full metering and is subject to enforcement action of the state engineer in accordance with subsection 8, and subsection 8 has fines and penalties and stuff there. You can go look at all that, but didn't need to go through all of it. But there's penalties attached. Then the third part is there's money that is going to be appropriated for this. Purportedly, we got to see how it all works out, but the idea is that money would be appropriated for this. And then depending on how early someone applies for that money, there's kind of this sliding scale. The earlier you apply, the more money you could get to help cover that project. So 2022, 70% of the cost of the project could be covered through the grants. Going all the way down to 2030, 10% of the cost of the project could be covered by the grants. So those are the big highlights of this bill. Required by 2030. There are penalties if you don't. And there's funds available to help you all along the way with more funds the earlier you adopt the metering. So would love thoughts, comments on this one and where we should take a decision. Yeah, Mark.
This might be more for people online, but when Senator Anderegg brought this up a couple of years ago, there was a big discussion about certain systems who thought their water was too unclean to make it through a meter. And there still is an exemption in this bill if you can't get a meter that will work with the water in your system. So I just think people need to know that if they're concerned about that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, online, Carson.
All right, we've got a couple questions here. Actually, I can simplify it to two questions. First, this bill doesn't affect cities that don't have secondary water systems, correct?
Correct.
Perfect. And then from David Johnson, are there exceptions on small towns? Does the scale of raw water to commercial uses fall under this or give consideration to this?
That's great. Mark, I don't know if that's what you were mentioning at all, or if you know more. So no specific small town exemption.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then, Liam, run all the way back over here. There, I think everybody should go on opposite sides of the room. Liam needs some exercise. So someone over here, get ready to comment.
Thank you very much, Liam. Just a question. We've seen this type of thing before, where the state has proposed something and offered to pay for something, and then we've never seen a cent, or never seen a very little money put towards a grant of this sort. The kind you're talking about here, that's millions of dollars worth of meter.
Mm-hmm.
And does JRI ring a bell for anybody? Where here, we'll do this. We'll reduce the size of our prisons. We'll reduce the size of our holding facilities. We'll go ahead and provide you with all the money that you need in order to take care of the mental health and addiction recovery and that type of thing. We got very, very little, if any, when it came to the promises that were financial and the support that we needed in order to make the program work. What I'm worried about is a city that has a lot of secondary water, and we just took over a very large secondary water company, that we're never going to see the 70%, 65%. I doubt that we'll see the 10%. If other competing interests come and they find some place to use that money. It happened also with police. If you remember a number of years ago that we had an idea that the police departments, in order to subsidize the retirement system, they had a worked out plan 2 years ago to do that. And it involves the state contributing, I think it was $5 million, first time, one-time money, and then subsequently money each year after that. The difficulty with this is we accept that and we get dragged into it, and then the next thing you know, we don't have the funding. This would be a disaster if we did not have funding. So
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think any position we take would be contingent.
can we have them give us the money first?
I'm sure they'd love that.
That's the way it always works.
Okay.
So I'm a secondary water provider, and we have 20% of our system already metered, and it's still going to cost us roughly $30 to $40 million to do the other 13,000 connections that we have. So our user rates would have to go up at least 50%, if not 100%. So we're talking significant amounts of money, even with the grants. So I know there's been talk with $50 million from the ARPA funding, and again, that has to be spent by 2026. And then after that, I guess additional funds may be sent our way. But even then, it's still going to be very costly. And again, the logistics of actually installing that in that time period is very difficult, if not impossible.
Okay, that's a great comment. So you said, just to make sure I captured it, so 30 to 40 million just for yours. So if there's 50 million set aside and you're getting 70%, you're still not quite getting covered just for yours. Okay. Yep. Okay, that's awesome. Not awesome, but your point is awesome. Thank you. That is so great you have that problem. Thank you. No.
All right, 2 comments online. First from Jason Brown in Beaver. Beaver City and many other rural communities are opposed to this legislation. Not all communities need this mandate. End users will pay a significant cost, and we have maxed out secondary water system. So why penalize communities like ours? And then, did you want to respond to that comment, or do you want the next comment?
I know, that's a great comment, yeah.
Okay. And then the second comment is from Aaron Wells. Are the grants competitive, or just if your city applies, you get the grant? If they are competitive, how will they judge what city gets what money and which city doesn't? So kind of to Gary's point.
Yeah, and I don't know that I have a great answer for that question yet. If anyone else knows, I would love to hear it, but I don't think we know. That's one of the unknowns. And as always, contingent on how much actually gets appropriated.
Has the bill been identified, or have they identified who would be most affected in this in terms of second metering? I mean, is it smaller cities? Is it every city? Is it?
Well, and someone who knows much more, but yeah, I mean, Leighton just said you've got some work to do here. There's small cities that have work to do here. It ranges in different places across the state. Yeah, Mayor.
I'm a little concerned about the amount of money that we're spending to do this. The problem that we're trying to solve is people using too much water. Is it $1 million solution for a $10 problem? That's a lot of money to put meters on. I don't know. I just see our tax dollars going for something that maybe there's another solution than putting meters on things.
Maybe, and I don't have an answer for that one. Got one back here? Yeah.
In Pleasant Grove, we have 40,000 people. We have a secondary water system to replace all the meters for $8 million at 70%. We would probably jump on that if that money was guaranteed. This would be something we'd be interested in. To the point of, do we need secondary water meters? Before we built our secondary system, which was in 2008, 9, 10, and they were using culinary, our water use doubled. When the culinary water was metered, it was half of what it is now when it's not metered. And in my opinion, we've tried conservation, we've tried many different ways to get residents to not use as much water. And my opinion is until we meter, there is no incentive really for people to turn off their secondary water. So I think it is something that we eventually need to do on the residential end. To Isaac's point, I mean, there's the rural side and the agricultural use, but I think for us, we would jump at this. And when I was in South Ogden before, South Ogden was part of Pine View and the Weber Basin Water Conservancy District. So, are they going to have are they going to be able to use this money as well? I mean, there's a lot of different ways that water's delivered.
A quick question, just for clarification, has it been discussed how much approximately it costs to set up a meter at a home?
Sorry, one more time.
Oh,
Sidebar.
Just clarification, I'm not sure if you've mentioned this already, and with Kaysville, curious, has it been estimated how much will cost each home to set up a meter? Like, what's the price breakdown per home, or?
Mark, I see you know that one. I know it. I know it's different for new homes versus existing homes.
That'd be nice to just kind of have a basic understanding.
Well, I think we were based on. Hold on. Justin relay for me, but I was just going to yell at Justin and he could repeat it. But I think Weber Basin Water Conservancy District has the most experience with this, and I'm trying to remember the number that they said. I thought it was a couple $1,000s per connection to install on existing.
Okay, 1,500 to 2,000
1,500 to
for an
2,000.
existing.
Yeah, and so it just depends on. Yeah, and costs have gone up in the last 4 years since Weber Basin did that. So.
You know, for a new home, what it looks like, new connection. Yeah, so it's somewhere around 1,000 for a new home, 2,000 for an existing home to retrofit that.
And the truth is, this is a super important issue. I mean, it is worth pursuing because in order to manage growth and to try and provide water, in order to get the savings, like has been talked about in Utah County, right? I mean, this is a real driver. Is the benefit worth the cost? You know, it's hard to know, but it is a significant issue that does need to be addressed. And I think from the governor's perspective, my guess is that this is kind of one-time money that's available, and he wants to make the most of it in order to make this happen. So it's a conundrum because it's a pretty difficult thing to say is not important.
Just to shed some light as to whether or not this is worth it. When our city has already done this, we're not going to get reimbursed for it by the state like everybody else. But
yeah, for being in front.
Yeah, it's, early mover bonus, I guess.
Yep.
But we saw about a 30% reduction in our water usage across the system, and so it is a significant amount of money and a significant amount of water that you will see saved by implementing this.
I will take one more comment, and then in interest of time, we'll comment right there.
Oh, just to follow up with that, I think we can all agree that we all need to save water. That's not really the issue. I think we'd all be unanimous on that. But I look at this and it seems a little bit, not so much aggressive, but I'm worried if it's one-time money put out from the state, this is going to be an issue that will affect all of us forever. And so I would like to see more assurances from the state side, and really concerned if the grants are competitive. I think it just needs to be a pretty transparent, open process so all of us can get up to speed. And I'm concerned about our city. We're really tight in our budget as it is, as most cities are. And so I think we all understand the need to do this, but we need a little more specifics, I think.
So kind of a straw poll, just get a feel for the room really quick. And people online. So let me say this a couple different ways. How comfortable are we as a group for the concept of secondary metering if the funding is there? If this funding was assured, how comfortable are we with this concept of secondary metering? Just raise a hands. Keep them up there.
This is a straw poll.
This is a straw poll. This isn't binding. Just getting an idea here.
Yes, this is.
If there is funding is assured.
Carson online, will you just? Well, we'll get to that in a second. So just start with the funding.
We're just going to talk about funding for a second here.
Questions are coming.
Okay. Support for the concept if there is no funding and you just have to do it.
Okay, well, yeah.
Okay. Barely counts there. You already did it.
Okay, hold on.
But okay.
Keep them high.
Keep them up there.
I got Murray, Salt Lake City.
And then Carson.
So, yeah, I'll come back to Carson 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, Carson, let's go.
Oh, Carson, yeah.
So on the first question, if there's funding, what was the?
Reaction.
I'm going to try to describe the reaction. I think I'd say along the more urban areas, I think yes, with funding. It looks like some rural folks still have opposition even with funding.
Okay.
And then it looks like without funding, it's a couple of people saying yes, but a lot of folks opposing.
Yeah. So let's talk about time frame. So right now, this goes through January 1st, 2030. Independent of funding, we're just talking about the runway here, the time frame. How supportive you are of this concept, given that time frame of about 8 years for implementation? Okay.
So,
Keep your hands up.
I see some people asking clarifying questions.
Yeah, any clarifying questions? Or is it just commenting on?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you supportive of this concept with this time frame?
With money.
Thank you.
With money.
With money, money's still there.
Yeah, with money, does this time frame work?
Well, I think we know that without money.
Yeah,
where
I know,
that's
but now
at.
you're asking for a different time frame. So
All right, I'm going to ask this, what's a viable time frame? Say it's fully funded, what is a viable time frame? Because I heard some mumbling that this is not realistic. So what would be realistic? Law already requires it of all new builds. Yeah. So yes, that is very realistic. Yeah, Brian.
So the only concern I have, and I represent Conway Heights City, doesn't have its own secondary water system, but I do belong to a secondary water system. It's about 400 users, which is pretty small. My concern about this is that the declining scale, I mean, if all of a sudden everybody in the state wants to get meters on their secondary watering system, there's going to be a supply chain issue.
Mhm.
So you're going to penalize some users who, just by virtue of the supply that's available, aren't going to be able to meet this timeline. So I wonder if anybody's talked to them about that, and if they could maybe extend out rather than have the funding reduced so quickly, is maybe have it stay level for 5 years and then start declining. Because there's going to be, I guarantee you there's going to be supply chain issues. I mean, heck, you can hardly get a loaf of bread anymore, it seems like. So, I mean, it's like, all you hear about supply chain issues. Surely in this space, they're going to have that same problem.
Yeah, that's a great point. Then Carson, what was the reaction to the timeline issue online? Mostly.
So I think, let's see, looking online, I think some people say the time span between 5 and 15 years. It looks like some folks suggested that if it's funded, it could accelerate that like a little bit, maybe to the 5 to 10 range. But it looks like 15 years is pretty consistent. And I see a number of people who've also pointed out that it would interfere with supply chains, and if everybody's rushing to do it at once, it'll just make it all more expensive, let alone the costs of getting engineers and consultants who will be competing with other cities for bids.
Is there anything else you need on that? I think that gives us what we need. Okay, thank you. I think that gives us what we need. That gives us a great idea of where we're at and where we can, where we have room to talk on that one. All right, I think. Oh, election issues. Oh, we can do this fast.
Okay, so who's doing election issues?
I'll do elections.
All right.
All right, election issues, as much as I try to get away from it. All right, HB 178, ranked choice voting amendments. Currently, the current bill says the ranked choice voting pilot program is abolished, and it would require all cities to use ranked choice voting in primary and general elections. Good news is there's an upcoming sub, and the upcoming substitute would leave the choice to cities, basically exactly where we're at right now, would leave the choice to cities, and then ranked choice voting, the fight would move to partisan primaries and presidential primaries, which you may or may not have strong feelings about, but we don't need to worry about in here. So that one's really just an update at this point. Once that substitute hits, I don't think we have anything to worry about there at all. All right, other bills. You want to hit these ones quick, Cam?
Okay, quick update on these two bills. SB 115 restates the existing preemption that already exists in state law. The reason that we are opposed to it as currently drafted is the restatement does go broader than current law in a couple of places. So for example, if you're a city with a homeless resource center, right now under current law, you can require in the contract to have a weapons-free homeless resource center. But the language in SB 115 would preempt the ability of cities to do that via contract. So we're still trying to work through this piece. Met with the bill sponsor now 3 times over the last week, trying to address that issue with the homeless resource center piece. There was concern initially that the language here would preclude a city from being able to prohibit the discharge of firearms in city limits. We've now remedied that. But the big issue that's still outstanding is that ability to contract. So whether that's an ability to contract for the safety at a homeless resource center or for a performing arts venue, those are the real sticking points. Justin met with the bill sponsor again this morning, pushing on that piece. Any quick questions on that one? With SB 46, medical cannabis, this kind of set aside this particular bill, even though the bill itself is problematic. This is just a piece of a larger dialogue around what to do, particularly for first responders who are authorized to have a medical cannabis card. What happens if that individual is using medical cannabis while that individual is on the job? And what sort of liability could a city incur if that individual is impaired while on the job acting as a first responder, whether that's duty of care to others, driving vehicles at high speeds the opposite direction on the street, or anything else. So this is an issue that we tried to address last legislative session. We're still trying to address it this legislative session. SB 46 doesn't address what I just described, but it's an effort by the senator to address the issue I just described, and we're trying to address it through a different bill. Any quick questions on either of those two bills? Okay. Councilmember?
How is the cannabis bill protecting any patient under HIPAA? Does it remove HIPAA? Or, I mean, that's something that the patient and doctor work out in terms of their use of cannabis. So I'm just,
You're talking about this specific bill or just underlying cannabis law? I don't recall anything about HIPAA specifically in SB 46. Looking around to see if, okay, I see a couple of attorneys shaking their heads no. Really, what SB 46 is addressing is whether or not a public employee can have a medical cannabis card, which really isn't the issue. The issue is more what happens for an individual who has a cannabis card, who is using medical cannabis, and if that individual is impaired or creates liability for the city, should the individual be able to use while on the job? Those are the policy questions we're trying to address. Brian?
So, Cam, how do they treat opioids? I mean, opioids are legally prescribed substance. I'm sure a lot of city employees, hopefully not a lot, but there are some who are probably taking opioids. Wouldn't the same standard that they apply to opioids now apply to medical cannabis?
Sure, and that's one of the underlying legal issues in dispute in the litigation that's going on in one city. The question becomes, though, if you're someone who's using prescribed opioids, you're using it based on the prescription. It's usually for more of an acute symptom rather than, say, long-term care. And you still, a city may say, okay, we have rules and procedures in place that if you're using this certain type of opioid, you're not going to be able to drive a fire truck, right? And really, in a way, what we're trying to do is say the same thing, that if you're using medical cannabis for this type of condition, that then similar rules would apply. But that's part of the legal dispute. So again, I'm looking around to see if anybody else, who am I pointing? Oh, John. Oh, let's go. Evelyn has the mic, and then you, John.
Just a quick question. It looks like SB 115 and SB 46. SB 115 is on second reading and SB 46 on third. Are you guys sending out an action alert on these, or?
So we opposed SB 115 on the House floor, or excuse me, on the Senate. Let me back up. We opposed SB 115 in Senate committee. And the bill sponsor the bill sponsor told us he's willing to work with us. We've provided different language, including this morning, and we're still not there. So the tricky thing with SB 115 is it's a priority of the governor, House, and Senate leadership. This bill died the last 2 years because it never got to a Senate committee hearing. It passed out of the House overwhelmingly. So like we know the train's coming down the tracks, and we're just trying to get those pieces fixed. And we've had dialogue with the bill sponsor. We just haven't been able to get to yes yet. On SB 46, we've been trying to solve this bigger ticket item, but you're right. It flew through the Senate and is sitting in the House. So the action alert is TBD on both of them because there are bigger political pieces at play that we're trying to get addressed. Go ahead.
And I'll just add to that, and the other pieces may end up being in other bills. It may not be on these bills specifically that we'll get those concerns worked out.
Yeah, just someone mentioned the question about what's the difference between this and an opioid prescription? It's part of the problem is under federal law, you can have an opioid prescription. Under federal law, you cannot have a prescription for any kind of cannabis. And that's where the liability we may run into liability issues.
All right, we're running out of time. Do you want to talk about railroad real quick? Yeah, basically, if anybody has railroad-specific issues or 181, grab us after and we can talk about this. This one's up in committee this afternoon. All right, I'm going to run through this one really quickly. HB 135 for Representative Brammer, open and public meeting comment requirements, says a public body holding a meeting has to allow, or a public body holding a meeting has to allow public comment, is basically what his bill says. We're working with him, and it probably is sitting on my email on my phone right now, because we were working at it before I stood up, getting some language that would specifically amend exempting work sessions, administrative meetings, planning commission meetings, is what we're working on getting exempted there. I think the current substitute of the bill, like there in B, says a public body shall adopt a resolution, rule, or ordinance that provides for reasonable public comment to be made. So there is there's going to be an amendment on this one. It's going to be in committee tomorrow. I think the amendment, if it gives these exemptions we're looking for, probably gets us to neutral on this bill. But we've been working with the sponsor. And in 10 minutes, I probably have updated language I can share. But that's where this one's at. So Mayor, I think we got through our bill list, and LRGC probably wants us out of the room pretty quickly. So.
So the last thing we need to do then is to consider whether our membership supports the positions that have been announced here today or discussed here today. And if anybody has any caveats or anything like that, we need a motion with respect to that. Yeah, ratify everything else that we've talked about on the list.
Carson, do we have the tracker on, or is it just? Okay, perfect. You already have it up, or? Oh, got it.
There's one bill that's moving through quickly that I'd just really like to bring everybody's attention to. I'm Mike Black from Kaysville. It's Senate Bill 66, and I talked to Gary Crane about it. It's electric bicycles. They're trying to change the definition of electric bicycles, especially those of you who have active transportation in your cities. It would basically change almost all electric bicycles to an OHV, and OHVs are not allowed on roads and paths and all those things, so it would prohibit the use of those. That bill's moving through quickly. People just need to know that, especially if you're really pushing active transportation in your cities. There are good parts of the bill that talk about some accessibility issues, but by changing that definition, it could really change how your active transportation, where you're trying to promote these bicycles and then they would be subject to all the licensing of OHVs and all the rules and regulations.
Do you know what that number is?
Senate Bill 66.
66.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So did you cover HB 140? Did I miss that?
No, we did not cover 140. I don't think we have any specific updates on that one. Well, the one thing I did hear this morning is that bill really may not be moving forward anymore. It's been sitting in rules for about 10 days there, and it could be that's where that stays. So no, we didn't cover it, but we don't have any specific updates on it either. Yes, you want me to keep, I was. 95 is
It's there.
opposed right now.
That's good.
You want to keep it there? Okay, perfect.
Okay, looking for a motion then. Motion and second to approve staff recommendations, comment
I
or
think we have a
discussion?
comment here.
Is, I can't remember the bill itself, but it has something to do with state employees or employees, government employees. Does that affect municipalities, employees? Does anybody know?
Do you know
I'll
which
find
one?
the bill. I can't
Yeah, if you
remember.
can find the bill. I'm not sure which one that, I know there's a couple ones out there, so I'm not sure which one.
Okay, any other discussion? Then all in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that carries. Councilmember Fowler, do you have something?
I was raising my hand to say aye.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you. All right, and I think that concludes our business for today, so. Yeah, so if anybody else have anything else you want to bring up, or else, if you do, you can come forward and talk to one of us. Thank you, everybody. Motion to adjourn? All in favor? We're adjourned.